She glanced at it and replied, "That's nice, Evan," before turning back to Ryan, who was bragging about scoring 2 points in a basketball game. My dad, beaming, said, "You're a natural athlete, kid." 2 points. Meanwhile, my hard work was dismissed with a casual, "That's nice." By high school, I stopped expecting anything. I'd come home, drop my backpack in my room, and immerse myself in my art or little projects. It was easier to disappear than to fight for attention. Ryan, meanwhile, thrived in the spotlight, strutting around with a smug smile, fully aware of his status as the favorite. He wasn't shy about rubbing it in, either. If I bought myself a pair of cheap sneakers, he'd mock me. Finally upgrading from hand-me-downs? At dinner, he'd interrupt me with stories about his soccer team or plans for a fitness brand, and my parents never stopped him. If I ever complained, they'd scold me, "Don't be so sensitive, Evan. Ryan's just joking." But it never felt like a joke. One moment solidified everything for me. When I was 17, I spent weeks preparing for a regional business competition. I designed handmade crafts, created a presentation, and perfected my pitch. When I won first place, I was ecstatic. I rushed home, certificate in hand, and announced, "Dad, I won first place in the business competition." He barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's nice. Did you see Ryan's new fitness logo? It looks so professional." I stood there, stunned, as the ground seemed to disappear beneath me. That was when I realized nothing would ever change. No matter what I did, I would never be Ryan. After that, I made a decision. I was done waiting for their approval. I couldn't keep living like I didn't matter. I started planning my escape as soon as I graduated. I wasn't sure how I'd manage it, but I knew I had to leave. It wouldn't be easy. My parents had sunk thousands into Ryan's latest business venture, a fitness gear brand that made no sense and had little left for me. When I told them I wanted to move out and focus on my own small business, my dad dismissed me. "Evan, we can't spread ourselves too thin. Ryan's business is the future of this family." That was the final straw. If I wanted a better life, I'd have to create it myself. I realized I would have to build my life on my own. No help, no encouragement, just me. And that's exactly what I did. I didn't leave right after graduation with a flawless plan, a detailed roadmap, or even much of a safety net. All I had was an old backpack, my laptop, a few $100s I'd saved from odd jobs, and a level of determination I didn't know I possessed. After spending my entire life being invisible, walking out of that house felt like stepping into the light for the first time. The day I left, it was raining. Because of course it was. My parents didn't even notice me packing up my belongings. Ryan had a soccer tournament that weekend, so Karen was busy ironing his jersey, and Steve was loading lawn chairs and coolers into the car. I stood at the front door, my bag slung over one shoulder, and watched them rush around. Ryan came downstairs with his usual smug grin and asked, "Where are you off to, Evan?" "Going to write poetry in the park?" I didn't respond to his jab. I just looked him in the eye and said, "Good luck at your game." My dad barely acknowledged me when I stepped outside, waving a distracted hand over his shoulder and saying, "See you later, bud." They didn't see me drive away, take the highway, and head to Columbus, where I'd rented a tiny studio apartment. They had no idea I wasn't coming back. The apartment wasn't much. It was in an old building with water-stained ceilings and carpets that smelled like stale smoke. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a place where I wasn't constantly reminded that I didn't matter. I wasted no time setting up a makeshift office in the corner, a shaky desk I'd bought for $10 at a yard sale, and a plastic chair that left my back aching. None of that mattered. I was finally free. When I wasn't bagging groceries at my part-time job, I was teaching myself how to run a business. I stayed up late watching YouTube tutorials on marketing, web design, and branding. I read blog posts, joined forums, and devoured anything that could help me learn. My business idea wasn't revolutionary. Customized products like mugs, tote bags, notebooks, and stationery, all with a personal touch. I created every design myself, often staying up until the early hours of the morning, hunched over my laptop. I researched niche markets like book clubs, small weddings, and hobby groups, aiming to make my products feel special and tailored to each buyer. The first sale I made felt like winning the lottery. Someone bought a mug I'd designed for $18. It had a cheesy slogan about being a proud cat owner. I stared at the notification for ages, barely believing it. Someone out there valued something I had created. That small sale ignited a fire in me. I threw myself into growing the business, even when it meant making sacrifices. I skipped meals to afford supplies, walked to work to save on gas, and ran on cheap instant coffee and sheer determination. Despite the exhaustion, I felt more alive than ever. Meanwhile, Ryan's business was collapsing. I didn't hear about it directly. My parents weren't exactly calling to fill me in, but social media gave me all the clues I needed. His team, which consisted of a few friends more interested in partying than working, had stopped posting updates. His professionally designed logo, which my parents had paid for, was plastered everywhere, but no one seemed to be buying. When Ryan did post, it was vague motivational fluff like "dream big" or "hustle hard," accompanied by photos of him pretending to work at a desk. It was almost comical. I knew my parents were still pouring money into his failing venture, desperate to believe their golden child could turn things around. By the time I turned 19, my business was gaining traction. I had a small but loyal customer base and had saved enough to move into a slightly bigger office, a single room in a low-rise downtown building. The wallpaper was peeling and the floors creaked, but it was a step up from working out of my apartment. Every day I sat at my desk surrounded by boxes of mugs, tote bags, and planners, working harder than I ever thought possible. I handled every aspect of the business myself: designing, printing, packing, and shipping. Some nights, I'd collapse into my chair, my hands covered in ink or tape, and stare at the ceiling, wondering if I could keep going. But I always found the strength to push forward. Then, out of nowhere, my parents called. It had been months since I'd heard from them, months of peaceful silence. I was in the middle of packing an order when my phone buzzed. "Hello, Evan," my dad said, his voice overly cheerful. "How's life treating you?" I knew right away they needed something. They never called unless they wanted a favor. Leaning back in my chair, I waited for him to get to the point. "Well," he continued after a pause, "Ryan's got a new business idea. Something really exciting. We're organizing a little family meeting to brainstorm, and we thought you could come home and, help out." There it was. They didn't care how I was doing or about the work I'd been pouring myself into. All they cared about was Ryan. "Why would I do that?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though I was boiling inside. "Because family sticks together, Evan," my dad replied like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Ryan's learned a lot since his last venture didn't work out. We just want to support him, and you could really help him get back on his feet." I let out a short laugh. "Why would I help Ryan? You've never once asked if I needed help with anything." "Evan," my dad said, sounding offended, "we've always been there for you." "No, you haven't," I interrupted. "Don't pretend you have. Ryan's your whole world, and you know it." The conversation started with me expecting an argument, but instead, there was silence. Then my dad said, "If you don't come back, we'll stop supporting you financially." That made me laugh even harder. "Dad, I haven't needed your money in ages, I replied. I'm doing just fine on my own. Another pause. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. It means I've built my own business while you were busy investing everything in Ryan. And guess what? It's working. I could almost hear his disbelief through the phone. You're joking, he said. I'm not, I answered bluntly. I don't need you anymore. I haven't for a while. After that, he hung up. I put my phone down, took a deep breath, and let it sink in. Years of rejection had finally lifted off my shoulders. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need them at all. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. After that call, I thought my parents would leave me alone. I assumed Steve and Karen would be too shocked to process that I was thriving without them. But I was wrong. If anything, my revelation seemed to provoke them, as if the idea of me succeeding beyond their reach was somehow offensive. For a while, though, the quiet was blissful. I immersed myself in my work, and my business thrived. Orders kept coming in, and I expanded my product lines to include custom planners, journals, wedding favors, corporate gifts, and quirky bundles for book clubs. Whatever people wanted personalized, I designed it. My days were spent in my little office, surrounded by boxes and unfinished prototypes. I'd upgraded my shaky $10 desk to something sturdier, but I still used the same cheap chair. Comfort wasn't my priority. In the corner, my coffee maker worked overtime, and my corkboard overflowed with sticky notes for new ideas. My life was a whirlwind, but it was mine, and I loved it. As the months passed, my business grew faster than I'd anticipated. My online customer base was loyal, and word of mouth started bringing in larger orders. A boutique shop in Cincinnati reached out, asking if I could supply them with exclusive notebooks and tote bags. When I signed the contract, I leaned back in my chair and grinned at the ceiling. Me, the forgotten son, the overlooked kid, making real deals and earning actual money. Meanwhile, Ryan's business was crashing. I didn't hear much from my parents, but news trickled in from people back home. Ryan's fitness brand had completely flopped. My parents had rented him an office in downtown Ashwood, poured money into branding, and even hired an expert consultant, who was apparently just one of Ryan's friends with a LinkedIn profile. None of it made a difference. One day, Nate, a friend from high school, sent me a photo he'd snapped of Ryan's office. The windows were dusty, the lights were off, and a handwritten "Back Soon" sign had been taped to the door for weeks. "Golden Boy isn't looking so golden anymore," Nate texted. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a grim sense of satisfaction. After years of being dismissed and cast aside, seeing their golden child falter while I built something real was undeniably validating. But my parents weren't ready to face reality. 2 months after the awkward phone call with my dad, my mom called. I was packing orders, the smell of cardboard and ink filling the room, when my phone buzzed on the desk. Seeing Mom on the caller ID, I hesitated, debating whether to ignore it. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Hello, Evan. It's Mom." "Oh, it's so good to hear your voice," she said, her tone overly sweet. The one she used when she wanted something. I leaned against my desk, already bracing myself. "What do you need, Mom?" I asked. She hesitated, and for a moment, her fake cheerful tone faltered. "It's not about needing anything, sweetheart. Your father and I were just talking, and we realized we haven't heard from you in so long. We're worried about you." "Worried?" I asked evenly. "I'm fine. Busy with work." "That's good to hear," she said quickly, latching onto the conversation. "Speaking of work, well, your father and I have been thinking a lot about Ryan. He's had such a tough time lately, and we just want to help him get back on track. Here it comes. We were hoping you could talk to him, she continued. Maybe give him some advice. You've clearly done so well for yourself. Maybe you could help him figure out what he's doing wrong. I let out a bitter laugh, catching her off guard. You're serious? Evan, she said, her tone shifting to exasperation. This isn't about the past. It's about family. Ryan looks up to you. No, he doesn't, I interrupted. He never has. And you don't care about my success, Mom. You just want me to bail him out because you're running out of ways to prop him up. That's not fair, she said sharply. We care about you, Evan. We've always cared about you. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing those words, but now they meant nothing. You know what's not fair, Mom? I said, my voice calm but cold. Spending your whole life treating one son like a prize and the other like a burden. And now that Ryan's failing, you suddenly want me to step in and save him? No. I heard her take a shaky breath. We just want to fix this, Evan. We're still a family. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. No, Mom. You and Dad only care about me when it's convenient for you. I don't owe you or Ryan anything. Not anymore. The line went quiet for a long moment before she said softly, I don't know why you're being so cold to us. I didn't bother responding. For several weeks after I hung up the phone and tossed it onto my desk, the calls kept coming. Steve left angry voicemails accusing me of being ungrateful and abandoning the family, while Karen sent long, rambling texts about forgiveness and family values. I ignored every one of them. Then Ryan appeared. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was busy sorting inventory when my receptionist, a college intern I had hired, popped her head into my office. Evan, there's a guy here asking for you. Says he's your brother. My stomach sank, but I forced myself to stay composed. Send him in, I said. Ryan walked in, a shadow of the smug person I once knew. His hair was unkempt, his eyes looked tired, and his clothes seemed like they hadn't seen a washing machine in days. He didn't bother sitting down, just stood there with his hands shoved into his pockets. Evan, he said softly, quieter than I'd ever heard him. Can we talk? Leaning back in my chair, I crossed my arms. What do you want, Ryan? He stared at the floor. I messed up. I know I messed up. Mom and Dad, they're mad at me, mad at everything. They keep saying I ruined everything and I don't know what to do. I raised an eyebrow. And you think I can fix that? He finally looked at me, desperation written all over his face. I need someone to have my back. I studied him, memories flooding in of all the years he'd mocked me, basking in favoritism while I was pushed aside. All those moments when he'd laughed at me, or rubbed in how much better he was treated. And now, here he was, asking for my help. You want me to have your back? I said slowly. Where were you when I needed someone to have mine? Ryan flinched, as though I had physically hit him. He didn't say a word. I shook my head. You made your choices, Ryan. You let Mom and Dad spoil you while they ignored me. Now, you're facing the consequences. That's not my problem. He stood silently for a moment before turning and leaving without saying another word. As the door closed behind him, I exhaled deeply. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I wasn't the invisible kid in the shadows anymore. I was in charge now. A week after Ryan's unexpected visit, I thought they might finally understand. I had made it clear. I wasn't their fallback plan, their fixer, or their safety net. I was done being treated as the son who only mattered when their favorite child failed. But, of course, they couldn't let it go. At first, it was subtle. Random calls I didn't answer. My dad left vague voicemails about family emergencies and sticking together during tough times. Karen texted things like, "Evan, please call us. We need you." I deleted the messages without reading them fully. Then, things escalated. One afternoon, I was focused on finalizing designs for a big wedding favor order when my office door flew open. Startled, I looked up to see my receptionist, Tina, stumble in, her face pale. Evan," she stammered. "There's a woman here. She says she's your mom. She wouldn't take no for an answer." I froze. "She's here." Before Tina could reply, Karen barged in, clutching her purse like a shield. "Evan," she said breathlessly, as though just getting through the door was a victory. "We need to talk." I sighed, leaning back in my chair to steady my voice. "You can't just show up here, Mom. This is my workplace." Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the shelves of inventory, the stacks of boxes, and the open design files on my computer. Her expression flickered between surprise and discomfort, like she couldn't quite believe I'd built something substantial. This is nice," she said weakly. Ignoring her attempt at small talk, I asked, "What are you doing here?" Karen exhaled shakily, stepping closer. "Evan, we can't keep pretending everything's fine. Your father and we're in trouble. Things have gotten really bad." I stayed silent, crossing my arms as she squirmed under the weight of my silence. Finally, she admitted, "Ryan's business failed." She said it like it was some shocking revelation. "We invested everything in him. We thought he'd turn things around, but it didn't work. The house is gone." That caught me off guard. "Gone?" Tears welled in her eyes as her voice trembled. "We couldn't keep up with the mortgage after everything we poured into Ryan. We had to sell it. We're living in a tiny apartment now. Barely enough space to move." I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just numbness. I thought of the house where Ryan had been treated like royalty while I was overlooked. Now it was gone, along with their fantasies about Ryan's success. "So, that's why you're here," I said flatly. "You want my help?" Her face crumpled. "We don't have anyone else to turn to. Your father, he's being sued by an old client for breach of contract. It's more than we can handle." "And Ryan?" I asked. "What's he doing to help?" Karen hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Ryan left," she said quietly. I blinked. "He what?" "He moved 2 states away. He's staying with a friend and won't answer our calls." That hit me harder than I expected. After being pampered, praised, and prioritized for years, Ryan had abandoned them the moment things got tough. And now they wanted me, the son they'd dismissed my entire life, to clean up his mess. "Let me get this straight," I began. Leaning forward, I said, "You spent years bending over backward for Ryan, giving him everything. Your time, money, and love. Now that he's walked away, you're coming to me because you have no one else." Karen winced, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. Maybe guilt or maybe shame. "It's not like that, Evan," she said. "Then what is it?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Because that's exactly how it looks." She took an unsteady step closer to my desk. "We made mistakes, Evan. I know we did. We were so focused on helping Ryan succeed that we lost sight of everything else. Of you. I know we hurt you, and I'm so sorry. But please, we're asking for help. Just this once." I looked at her, standing in my office, pleading for scraps of mercy, the same way I had begged for theirs throughout my childhood. I should have felt triumphant seeing her so broken and desperate, but instead, I just felt exhausted. "What kind of help do you want?" I asked carefully, her shoulders sagged in relief. We just need enough to get back on our feet, help us figure out the finances, pay down some bills, and give us a chance to start over. I shook my head. You don't understand, do you? I worked for everything I have, every single dollar. I sacrificed sleep, food, and time, while you threw all your money at Ryan's ridiculous dreams. And now you're asking me to save you? Tears rolled down her face, but I couldn't stop. Do you even realize what you put me through? All those years I begged for a sliver of your attention, your approval, watching you treat Ryan like a king while I got the leftovers. And now you're here because you don't have a choice. She sniffled, trying to steady herself. We want to fix things, Evan. We can't change the past, but we can start over as a family. Family? I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. You don't get to use that word. You didn't care about me when it mattered. You only care now because you've run out of options. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. I stared at her for a long moment, my chest tight, fists clenched under the desk. Part of me wanted to throw her out and slam the door, but another part, one I'd tried to bury for years, felt the weight of her words, the emptiness of neglect, the ache of wanting something I'd never had. Finally, I exhaled. I'm not giving you money, Mom. I won't bail you out. But I'll think about something. I don't know what yet. Her eyes lit up, as if even that small sliver of hope was enough. Thank you, Evan. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said sharply. You haven't earned it. She left shortly after, the faint smell of her floral perfume lingering in the room. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door, trying to process what had just happened. For years, I'd been invisible to them, and now they saw me, not as their son, but as their last-ditch lifeline. I didn't know what I would do. Part of me wanted to walk away and let them deal with the fallout of their choices. Another part, the one I wished I could silence, still felt tethered to them, no matter how much I tried to pretend otherwise. One thing was clear. Whatever I decided, it would be on my terms. I thought my mother's unannounced visit was the height of the chaos, but I should have known better. When my family falls apart, they don't just stumble, they drag everyone down with them. It didn't take long for my dad to make his move. A few days after my mother stormed into my office, I got another call. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but I answered out of habit. "Evan!" a gruff voice growled. "It's your father." I rolled my eyes. He didn't even bother with a greeting. "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, bracing for the nonsense I knew was coming. There was no warmth in his tone, just sharp frustration. "We need to talk, face to face. Your mother said you refused to help her." "That's because I did," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "I'm not bailing you out. I already told her that." He scoffed, as if I'd insulted him. "You'd let your own family fall apart after everything we've done for you?" I couldn't help but laugh at the audacity. "Everything you've done for me? Like ignoring me for 20 years? Like pouring all your money into Ryan while I worked for everything I own? Tell me, Dad, what exactly have you done for me?" "That's not the point," he snapped. "We're your parents, Evan. We raised you. We deserve your respect, if nothing else." My patience broke. "You don't get to demand respect. Respect is earned, and you lost mine a long time ago." There was a long pause, the kind of silence that said more than words ever could. Finally, he sighed, his voice softer now. "We're out of options, Evan. Your mother is barely holding it together. We've lost everything. The house, the business, the connections. Do you know how humiliating it is to have nothing after working your whole life?" "Maybe you should have thought of that before you handed Ryan everything on a silver platter," I shot back. "You made your choices, Now you get to live with them. For once, my dad didn't have a quick comeback. His voice softened further, something I hadn't heard in years. We were wrong about Ryan, about everything. But we don't know how to fix it without you. You're the only one doing well, Evan. The only one who made something of himself. The words should have mattered, but they felt hollow. I'd waited years for them to notice me, to say, "You matter, Evan." But now that they were saying it, it was too late. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I could do for them. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said at last, "but I'm not your safety net." I hung up before he could reply. My hand trembled as I set the phone down, letting out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the next few days, it felt like I was walking under a storm cloud. I couldn't focus. While I tried to focus on work, my parents' voices echoed in my mind. My mother's pleading tone and my father's frustration. Memories of my childhood replayed in my head. Forgotten birthdays, dismissed achievements, and the constant adoration they showered on Ryan. Guilt tried to creep in, and I resented it. A part of me still wanted to help them, as absurd as it seemed, not because they earned it, but because I wasn't like them. I wasn't cold or indifferent. No matter how much I told myself I didn't care anymore, deep down, I knew I did. Then Ryan showed up again. Late in the afternoon, just as I was locking up for the day, I saw him leaning against the wall outside my office building. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. His hair unkempt, his clothes rumpled, and his complexion pale. "Ryan," I said flatly, pulling the keys from the lock. "What are you doing here?" He straightened, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I need to talk to you." "We already talked." "Please, Evan," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Just 5 minutes." I sighed and crossed my arms, staying where I was. "Fine. Talk." Ryan shifted awkwardly, avoiding my eyes. "Mom and Dad are falling apart. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I thought I could make something work. I wanted to make them proud." I snorted. "Congratulations. You failed, just like they failed me." He winced, but I didn't stop. "You were handed everything, Ryan. Everything. And you squandered it. Meanwhile, I had to fight my way out of the mess you, Mom, and Dad created for me. So don't stand here and say you didn't mean for this to happen." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I was awful to you. I don't even know why I acted that way. I guess I liked being the favorite. I didn't realize how much it hurt you until now." I studied him for a moment. For once, Ryan didn't look smug or full of himself. He seemed small, vulnerable. "Too little, too late," I said finally. "I don't need your apology, Ryan. I've moved on." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I get it. I just thought you should know. I really am sorry." I didn't reply. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there by himself. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. Ryan's words echoed in my mind, along with my father's bitter confession that I was the only one who had succeeded. I should have felt victorious. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, the day they'd finally see my worth. But instead, I felt hollow. The years of neglect and rejection had left wounds too deep to heal. A week later, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Mary, the only member of my extended family I still kept in touch with. "Evan," she began cautiously, "I don't know if you've heard, but your parents are in serious trouble. The lawsuit is getting worse, and they might lose everything." "I figured," I said, trying to sound indifferent. She hesitated. "I know they treated you terribly. I know you don't owe them anything. But they're still your parents, Evan." Are you really going to let them hit rock bottom? I stayed silent for a moment, clenching my jaw. I don't know, Aunt Mary, she sighed. Just think about it. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. My parents neglected me for years, but now they're pleading for my help after their golden child let them down. I'll always remember the day they stopped truly seeing me. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a sudden event. It happened gradually, like paint slowly flaking off a wall, leaving nothing but emptiness behind. It wasn't always like this. When I was a kid, life seemed almost normal, or as normal as it could be in a quiet town like Ashwood, Ohio. My parents, Steve and Karen, had 2 sons. Me, Evan Carter, the older one, now 24, and Ryan, my younger brother, who just turned 22. The difference was that Ryan was the miracle child, the one who could do no wrong, while I existed somewhere in the background. Back then, I didn't realize the disparity. I didn't understand why my quiet nature and passion for drawing and building small projects weren't enough to hold their attention. I didn't know why all their energy, love, and resources were directed at Ryan. All I knew was that, bit by bit, I was fading into the background. Ryan was the kind of kid everyone gravitated toward. Even as a toddler, he had an irresistible charm that made strangers smile and adults laugh at his little jokes. By elementary school, he was already the star, beloved by teachers, surrounded by friends, and adored by my parents. Meanwhile, I was quieter, content with reading, drawing, and tinkering in my room. I wasn't the type to command attention or captivate a crowd with a grin like Ryan could. To Steve and Karen, I was just fine. Not someone who needed much, because I didn't demand it. At first, their favoritism was subtle. I remember Christmas mornings when I was 6 and Ryan was 4. We'd both tear through our gifts, but his pile was always a little bigger. I assumed it was because he was younger, and they wanted to spoil him more. Over time, though, it became clear that Ryan wasn't just their favorite. He was their everything. Birthdays made it unmistakable. Every year, our house transformed into a carnival for Ryan's birthday, with streamers on the walls, balloons filling the room, and kids running wild while music played. My dad would flip burgers like a grill master, and Ryan's gifts were always extravagant. A new bike, a PlayStation, a basketball hoop. Then there were my birthdays. A basic grocery store cake, a hastily written card, and a mumbled "Happy Birthday, Evan," before they turned back to discussing Ryan's soccer practice. I told myself birthdays didn't matter, but it still hurt. When I turned 12, I spent weeks begging for an art set I'd seen in a shop window. It had everything: paints, brushes, the works. My mom said she'd think about it. Instead, I got a pack of pens from the dollar store. That same year, Ryan got a brand new mountain bike for his 10th birthday. I watched from the porch as he rode it up and down the street. The worst part wasn't even the gifts. It was how my accomplishments were ignored. In middle school, I worked hard to earn straight A's. I remember clutching my report card, thrilled, and rushing to show my mom. "Look, I got straight A's," I exclaimed.